Right, Joshua 1, let's call this one As I Promised because it comes out of verse 3 of this first chapter. And this is a chapter where God is helping Joshua understand what he's going to need to know going into the conquest of the promised land. He's going to promise Joshua this one thing, that I will be with you wherever you go. But in turn, he's going to tell Joshua that he needs to do at least three things. One, the famous quote reminding him that he needs to be strong and courageous. And that's going to come up, I think, at least 4 times in this chapter. But beyond that, there are some less famous parts of what God is going to tell Joshua he needs to do. And once again, one part is going to go back to something he's told Moses over and over, and that is, you need to do all that I have commanded. And likewise, he's going to communicate that to Joshua as well in this chapter. But finally, a less mentioned part of what God requires of his people is going to be the requirement that Joshua meditate on God's word day and night. And we have seen this before. Why? Because we mentioned in the instruction to Israel's kings, he said, when you request a king, fine, you can have a king, but he is going to need to write down his own copy of the law, and he's going to need to read it daily, not necessarily the whole thing, but he's going to need to study it daily so that he is familiar with what is going on or what the requirements are for people who are supposed to essentially be doing some of the same things. Insofar as they have kids, they are supposed to be teaching these things to their kids as they are coming and they are going, so that they are familiar with the things that God is requiring of a nation that he is exalting and using as an example to all mankind for the way that we need to reconcile ourselves not only to God, but to one another. But beyond that, Joshua is not only going to receive from God what he needs to do, he's going to communicate to the people of Israel what they need to do. And it's going to essentially break down into at least 2 things. One, he's going to tell them within 3 days, they need to be ready to move. Going back to that point we made before, in terms of being nimble, being ready to go at a moment's notice, because you never know when opportunities are going to present themselves. And so they know that they're heading into the promised land, but he is telling them that they need to be 3 days ready to pack up everything they need to pack up and go into battle, because essentially that's what they're going to have to do. Not all of them, though, because 2 tribes and a half tribe have already come into their inheritance. But the second thing Joshua is going to remind them of is that they have to remember the promise that they made for the women, the children, and those who are not capable of going to war to go ahead and settle that land, but for the men of war to go forward to make sure that their brothers can come into their inheritance successfully as well. And so they agree to do that, stating a number of things. One, God be with you, Joshua, the way he was with Moses. And beyond that, be strong and courageous, as we've heard God tell him as well. And it finally sunk into me as I was looking for, okay, well, what's the practical application here? I may have missed it, but one thing that I did catch is that whole call to be strong and courageous goes back to where we started titling this chapter, and that's As I Promised. See, God never promised that this period of growth for them was going to be free of adversity. And one of the things I realized is some of my most disappointing times in life come when I have assumed things into God's promises that just aren't there. Times when he's brought me maybe into a period of growth, but I expected carefree living and perfection. I was still possibly just as disappointed as I was in times when I was struggling. Why? Because I had my expectations set in the wrong place. And so I believe that for each of us, we could benefit from the lesson that God seems to be telling Joshua here. He's literally saying, I have promised you the inheritance, but what he did not say is that I promised it would be easy. Therefore, at least 4 times he's saying, be strong and courageous. So as he is going into his period of growth and acquisition and prosperity, likewise leading the nation into their period of growth, they are not doing it with unhealthy expectations that it would be easy, but they will be strong and courageous so that as they go into their period of growth, they can have the peace of mind that comes with being courageous in the face of the adversities that go along with their success.